Rain hammered against the windshield like the sky itself was trying to stop him. Julian Thorne barely saw the road. His vision blurred, not from the storm, but from the words echoing in his head. She's engaged to her cousin. The sentence had shattered something inside him. For 5 years, he had buried his feelings beneath billion-dollar deals, ruthless discipline, and walls so high no one had ever dared climb them. But one careless sentence from an old man on a farmhouse porch had destroyed every defense he had. Because if Alara belonged to someone else, then everything he had survived, everything he had built, meant nothing. His phone buzzed on the passenger seat. Alara calling. His hand lunged for it. The headlights came too fast. A horn screamed. Metal exploded. Glass shattered. Darkness swallowed him whole. 3 months earlier, the executive floor of Thorne Tower was where ambition came to die. Assistants lasted weeks. Executives lasted months. Rivals lasted until Julian Thorne decided they no longer should. Only Alara Vance had survived him for 5 years. Maybe because she understood him better than anyone else. Maybe because she loved him enough to survive the cold. Or maybe because Julian Thorne, New York's youngest billionaire, the man the press called the Ice King of Wall Street, had never once trusted himself enough to let her go. The Henderson merger is finalized, Julian said without looking up from the mountain of reports on his desk. His voice was deep, controlled, dangerous in the way expensive things often were. Alara stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, Manhattan glittering beneath storm clouds beyond the glass. I drafted the press release an hour ago, she replied smoothly. And I sent Henderson a 1978 Dalmor. His wife mentioned at the gala it was his favorite. Silence. Then, the clicking of his keyboard stopped. Slowly, Alara turned. Julian was staring at her. Not at her face. At her. The way a starving man looked at a locked banquet. You remember too much, he murmured. A nervous smile touched her lips. That's what you pay me for. He rose from behind his desk. 6'3" of tailored charcoal, lethal intelligence, and devastating restraint. Every step he took toward her made her pulse pound harder. He stopped beside her at the window. Too close. Close enough for her to smell cedarwood and rain on his skin. 5 years, he said quietly. Most people can't survive 5 months with me. She swallowed. I have more patience than most people. His gaze dropped to her lips. The room changed. The air thickened. The city vanished. There was only him. Only the unbearable tension stretching between them. Until his expression hardened. He stepped back. Go home, Alara. Her chest tightened. You look tired, he added coolly. It's distracting. Distracting. That one word sliced deeper than cruelty ever could. Because she knew what he meant. He noticed her. He always noticed her. He just refused to do anything about it. 3 nights later, the annual Thorne Enterprises Gala glittered with wealth, power, and enough diamonds to blind a nation. Alara wore midnight blue silk. She had bought the dress for one stupid reason. To make Julian look at her like a woman. Not an assistant. Not a machine. Not his perfectly efficient shadow. Just once. And when she entered the ballroom, he looked. His conversation stopped mid-sentence. His eyes locked on her. And for one devastating second, he forgot every person around him. Then his face became unreadable again. As if the moment never happened. As if she had imagined it. So Alara smiled through the ache in her chest and headed for the bar. That was when Mark Reynolds appeared. Golden-haired, charming, vice president of marketing, and entirely too friendly for Julian's liking. Alara, Mark breathed, grinning. You look criminal tonight. She laughed softly. Careful, HR might hear you. Then let me risk it. He leaned closer. One drink after this? Somewhere your terrifying boss can't find us? Quote. Before she could answer, Mark placed a hand on the small of her back. Across the ballroom, Julian saw, and everything changed. His entire body went still. The senator beside him kept talking. The investors kept smiling, but Julian heard nothing, saw nothing, except Mark's hand on Alara. He abandoned the most powerful men in Manhattan without a word, stormed across the ballroom, and stopped in front of them like wrath in a tailored tuxedo. Mark, Mark turned. Boss. Quote, "You're fired." The words hit like gunfire. The entire surrounding crowd froze. Mark blinked. What? Quote, "You're terminated effective immediately." Julian. What the hell? We were just talking. Quote, "I don't pay you to put your hands on what isn't yours." Silence. Dead. Absolute silence. Alara's breath caught. Julian's eyes widened infinitesimally. He realized what he had said. But it was too late. Mark stared. Excuse me? Quote, Julian's voice turned lethal. "Pack your office. Security will escort you out." Mark left pale and speechless. Alara spun toward Julian, furious. "What is wrong with you?" Quote, he seized her wrist, not painfully, but firmly, and dragged her behind the velvet curtains of an empty side corridor. The second they were alone, she yanked free. "That was humiliating." Quote, "He touched you. So what?" Quote, his chest rose sharply. "So what?" he repeated, voice dangerously low. "He had his hands on you like you belonged to him." "And who do I belong to?" "Julian?" She shot back, years of pain breaking loose. "Because from where I stand, you don't want me, but you won't let anyone else near me either." Quote, that hit him like a blade. He stepped forward. She stepped back, until the wall stopped her. He braced one hand beside her head, towering over her, breathing hard. His voice broke into something raw. "When he touched you," Julian whispered, "I nearly lost my mind." Her heart stopped. Then he leaned closer, so close his lips brushed the corner of hers. And for one impossible second she thought, he's finally going to kiss me. But then, he froze. His entire body went rigid. Fear flashed across his face, and the walls slammed back into place. He stepped away, cold again, untouchable again. "It was unprofessional," he said flatly. Alara stared at him in disbelief. "Don't misunderstand my actions." Every ounce of warmth drained from her. Her eyes glistened. "Of course," she whispered. "How foolish of me." She walked away before he could see her tears. And Julian stood there alone in the dark, breathing like a man who had just survived a war. Because the truth was worse than anything she could imagine. He didn't stay away because he didn't want her. He stayed away because he wanted her too much. And if Alara Vance ever discovered how completely she owned the heart of Julian Thorne, she would have the power to destroy him. And for the first time in his life, that terrified him. The silence in the executive suite the following morning was different. It wasn't the productive, focused quiet Alara had grown used to over the years. It was a heavy, suffocating blanket. Julian had arrived before dawn, and by the time Alara walked in at 7 a.m., the air already smelled of burnt coffee and ozone. She placed a fresh espresso on his desk. He didn't look up, his eyes fixed on a spreadsheet, but she saw the way his jaw tightened as she moved. The near kiss in the alcove haunted the space between them. It was a ghost that refused to be exorcised. "Your schedule for the day," she began, her voice professional but brittle. "Cancel it all," Julian snapped. He finally looked at her, and the dark circles under his eyes told her he hadn't slept a wink. "I have a board meeting at noon. Everything else is secondary." "Julian, you have a lunch with the Japanese delegates. You've spent months." Quote, "I said cancel it." He slammed his hand on the desk, the sound echoing like a gunshot. Alara flinched. She wrote a quick note of resignation, tucked it into the journal, and prepared to leave it on his desk. But then, the elevator chimed. It was a delivery, legal documents that required immediate filing. In the flurry of the next 20 minutes, Alara handled the courier, packed her bag in a daze, and rushed out to catch the last train upstate. She forgot the journal. It sat on the edge of the communal marble table, a ticking time bomb of vulnerability. Julian emerged from his office an hour later. He was looking for her. He always was, even when he pretended not to be. He wanted to apologize. He wanted to tell her that the reason he fired Mark wasn't because of unprofessionalism, but because he couldn't bear the thought of another man's hands on the only thing that made his life worth living. But her desk was clear. Her coat was gone. He sighed, turning to head for the elevator. When the small leather book caught his eye, he recognized it. She carried it everywhere. He picked it up, intending to put it in his safe for her. But the book fell open. August 14th. He read. He wore the blue tie today. The one I bought him for his birthday that he claimed he didn't like. He wore it to the most important meeting of the year. Does he know that I know? Does he know that every time he looks at me and then looks away, a piece of me dies? Julian's heart stopped. He felt like a voyeur, a thief, but he couldn't stop. He sank into her chair. Her scent, that vanilla jasmine, clinging to the fabric, and read. He read about the time she cried in the break room because he had been particularly cruel during a merger. He read about her secret dreams of him holding her in a place where there were no desks and no deadlines. And then he reached the last entry, written only an hour ago. I have to leave, not just for my father, but for my soul. Loving Julian Thorne is a death sentence. He is a man made of stone, and I am breaking myself against him. I'm going back to the farm. I won't be coming back. No, Julian whispered into the empty office. The silence mocked him. He looked at the resignation letter tucked into the back. It was formal, cold, the exact version of her he had forced her to be. He felt a roar of agony in his chest. He had spent years building a fortress around his heart to ensure no one could ever hurt him the way his parents had. Only to realize he had built a prison and locked the only person who mattered on the outside. He grabbed his keys. He didn't care about the board meeting. He didn't care about the billion-dollar empire. He called his head of security. Trace Alara Vance's phone, he commanded. His voice raw. Now. The drive upstate was a nightmare. The rain had turned into a torrential downpour. The kind that turned the winding mountain roads into slick ribbons of black ice and mud. Julian's grip on the steering wheel was white-knuckled. He was 4 hours north of the city when he saw the sign for her town. His GPS led him down a gravel road toward a sprawling, humble farmhouse. He pulled into the driveway, his heart racing. He saw an old man on the porch, wrapped in a heavy flannel coat, watching the rain. Julian stepped out of his car, his expensive suit instantly ruined by the mud. I'm Julian Thorne, he said, breathless. I'm looking for Alara. The old man, Alara's grandfather, eyed him with a mixture of suspicion and pity. The boss, eh? She's inside, but she's busy. Her cousin is here, the one from the neighboring farm. They're inside talking about the engagement. About time, too. A girl like her shouldn't be wasting her life in a city that doesn't love her back. Julian felt the air leave his lungs. Engagement. He didn't hear the rest. He didn't hear the grandfather mention that the engagement was a discussion about denying a proposal from a persistent family friend. All Julian heard was that he was too late. He had read her diary, felt her love, and then arrived just in time to see her give it to someone else. He didn't even go to the door. He couldn't. The Ice King was shattered. He turned back to his car, stumbling in the mud, and drove away into the heart of the storm. His eyes so blurred with tears that the world disappeared into a haze of gray and red. The rain turned into a blinding shroud as Julian's Maybach tore away from the Vance farmhouse. The high-performance tires, designed for the smooth pavement of Park Avenue, fought a losing battle against the upstate sludge. Inside the cabin, the silence was deafening, broken only by Julian's ragged, hitching breaths. Engaged. The word echoed in his skull like a death knell. Engagement. He didn't hear the rest. He didn't hear the grandfather mention that the engagement was a discussion about denying a proposal from a persistent family friend. All Julian heard was that he was too late. He had read her diary, felt her love, and then arrived just in time to see her give it to someone else. He didn't even go to the door. He couldn't. The Ice King was shattered. He turned back to his car, stumbling in the mud, and drove away into the heart of the storm. His eyes so blurred with tears that the world disappeared into a haze of gray and red. The rain turned into a blinding shroud as Julian's Maybach tore away from the Vance farmhouse. The high-performance tires, designed for the smooth pavement of Park Avenue, fought a losing battle against the upstate sludge. Inside the cabin, the silence was deafening, broken only by Julian's ragged, hitching breaths. Engaged. The word echoed in his skull like a death knell. The heavy vehicle pirouetted on the ice-slicked asphalt. For a split second, the world went quiet. Julian saw the diary on the passenger seat, its pages fluttering. He saw Alara's handwriting, the elegant loops of her J in his name. I'm sorry, he thought, a final, silent confession. Then came the scream of tearing metal and the sickening crunch of the guardrail giving way. The car tumbled down the embankment, a chaotic centrifuge of glass and darkness, before slamming into the trunk of an ancient oak tree. Alara was in the kitchen, her hands wrapped around a mug of cider. When the sirens began, her cousin, David, was still sitting across from her, looking sheepish. I'm sorry for the pressure, Alara, David said softly. Grandpa just wants to see you settled. He doesn't understand that your heart is 500 miles away. It's okay, David, Alara whispered. My heart is. It's just broken, that's all. A neighbor burst through the door, chest heaving. There's a car off the 5-mile curve. A black one. Looks like one of those city tanks. Whoever's in there, they aren't moving. Alara's heart stopped. She didn't think. She didn't grab a coat. She ran. The scene at the curve was a nightmare. Flashing red and blue lights illuminated the rain. Turning the mud into the color of rust, she pushed through the small crowd of locals, her breath hitching as she saw the mangled remains of the Maybach. Julian, she shrieked, the sound lost in the thunder. She fought the deputy who tried to hold her back. That's my car. He's mine. Quote, when they finally cut him out of the wreckage, he was unrecognizable. The man who was always so meticulously groomed, whose suits never had a stray thread, was covered in blood and grime. His face was ghostly pale, his eyes closed. Is he breathing? She demanded, grabbing the sleeve of a paramedic. Pulse is weak. We're losing him, ma'am. As they loaded him into the ambulance, Alara lunged forward. She grabbed his limp, cold hand, her tears hot against his skin. Julian, you coward, she sobbed. You don't get to leave me like this. You don't get to read my thoughts and then die. Do you hear me? Wake up. Quote. The waiting room at the county hospital smelled of floor wax and stale coffee. Alara sat in a plastic chair, her midnight blue gala dress, now stained with mud and Julian's blood, clinging to her skin. She looked like a ghost haunting a hallway. Hours bled into each other. Her grandfather arrived, his face etched with guilt. Alara, I told him you were busy with the engagement. I thought he was just another city shark come to take you back to work. I didn't know. It doesn't matter, she said, her voice hollow. Nothing matters if he doesn't wake up. Finally, a surgeon emerged, stripping off his latex gloves. He's survived the surgery. We've stabilized the internal bleeding. But he's in a coma. There's significant head trauma. To be honest, Miss Vance, it's a miracle he's alive at all. The next 48 hours will tell the story. Can I see him? Quote, he's in the ICU. Only immediate family. I'm his everything, Alara said, her voice suddenly iron strong. And he is mine. The doctor looked at her bedraggled state, at the raw desperation in her eyes, and nodded slowly. The ICU was a cathedral of humming machines and beeping monitors. Julian looked so small in the hospital bed, swallowed by white linens. Alara sat beside him, taking his hand, the same hand that had fired Mark, the same hand that had almost touched her face in the alcove. I know you can hear me, she whispered, leaning close to his ear. I know you found the diary. I know you came all this way because you're a stubborn, arrogant man who can't stand not having the last word. So wake up, Julian. Wake up and tell me I'm unprofessional. Tell me I'm distracting. Just don't leave me in the silence. She stayed there as the sun began to peek through the hospital blinds. A weary sentinel at the gates of his life, waiting for the Ice King to find his way back to the thaw. The 48 hours passed in a blur of sterile light and the rhythmic, mechanical sigh of the ventilator. Alara didn't leave his side. She became a fixture in the ICU, a silent ghost who only moved to wet Julian's lips with a sponge or to whisper fragments of stories into the stillness. On the third night, the machines changed their tune. The frantic beeping smoothed into a steady pulse. Julian's eyelids fluttered, his pupils darting beneath thin skin before he finally, painfully, forced them open. The Ice King didn't look like a king anymore. He looked like a man who had seen the end of the world and was surprised to still be standing in the ruins. His gaze was hazy, unfocused, until it landed on Alara. Alara? His voice was a broken rasp, barely audible over the hum of the monitors. I'm here, Julian. I'm right here. She choked back a sob, pressing her forehead against his knuckles. He tried to sit up, a groan of agony escaping his lips. The farm. The man. You were. Shush, she soothed, her fingers threading through his matted hair. There was no engagement, Julian. My grandfather was mistaken. I was never leaving you for someone else. I was just leaving because I couldn't survive the silence anymore. He closed his eyes, a single tear tracking through the bruising on his cheek. I thought I lost you. I thought I finally waited too long to be human. The recovery was grueling. Julian's family lawyers and the Thorne Enterprises board descended like vultures, demanding he be moved to a private facility in Manhattan. But Julian, with a flicker of his old iron will, refused. He signed the discharge papers against medical advice 6 days later. Under one condition, he would recover at the Vance farmhouse. It's quiet, Julian told the doctors, though his eyes never left Alara, and it's the only place I can breathe. The farmhouse became a sanctuary of forced proximity. The first 2 weeks were purely clinical. Alara moved him into the downstairs guest room, a sun-drenched space that smelled of cedar and dried lavender. She became his hands, his legs, his strength. She helped him walk, his heavy arm draped over her shoulders, his body leaning into hers as they took agonizingly slow steps across the porch. She saw the flash of frustration in his eyes when he couldn't even button his own shirt, his fingers trembling from nerve damage. Let me, she whispered one morning, stepping into his space, as she worked the small buttons. Her knuckles brushed the warm skin of his chest. Julian's breath hitched. He looked down at her, his gaze intense and searching. The office persona was gone. There were no suits here, only soft flannel and the raw vulnerability of a man stripped of his armor. Why are you doing this, Alara? He asked, his voice low. I treated you like a shadow for 5 years. I ran myself off a road because I was too proud to ask you to stay. You should be in New York, starting over, not cleaning my wounds. Alara finished the last button and looked up, her eyes bright with unshed tears. Because shadows don't just disappear when the light goes out, Julian. They wait for it to come back. The intimacy grew in the quiet moments. They spent long afternoons by the fireplace, the crackle of burning oak the only soundtrack to their shared history. Julian began to talk, not about mergers or stock options, but about the boy who hid in libraries to escape his father's shouting. He told her about the crushing weight of the Thorne name, and how he had built the Ice King persona as a sarcophagus to keep his heart from being broken. Again, one rainy evening, the tension finally snapped. Alara was changing the bandage on his shoulder, her touch light and practiced. Julian reached out, his hand covering hers, stopping her movements. Alara, look at me. She met his gray eyes, which were now filled with a terrifying clarity. I didn't just come to the farm to stop you from resigning, he whispered, his thumb tracing the pulse point on her wrist. I came because I found the journal. I read every word, every time you said you loved me and every time you said I broke you. Alara tried to pull away, the shame of her exposed secrets burning her cheeks. But he held her firm. I loved you from the day you walked into my office in that ridiculous, oversized blazer, Julian said, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. I loved the way you remembered the names of my janitor's kids. I loved the way you challenged me when I was being a monster. But I was a coward. I thought that if I admitted I loved you, I'd lose the only thing I had left, my control. He leaned forward, the distance between them vanishing. I almost died without ever knowing what it felt like to be yours. Please, don't make me wait another 5 years. He didn't wait for an answer. He pulled her down, his lips meeting hers in a kiss that tasted of rain, regret, and the desperate hope of a man who had finally found his way home. It wasn't a billionaire's kiss. It was the kiss of a man who had lost everything and realized that the only thing worth keeping was the woman in his arms. But as they clung to each other in the firelight, the sound of a heavy car pulling into the gravel driveway shattered the peace. Julian's past had arrived to reclaim him, and it wasn't going to let him go without a fight. The gravel crunched like breaking bone under the tires of a heavy black SUV. Silas Thorne, Julian's uncle and the acting chairman of the board, stepped out into the mud with the disgusted air of a king visiting a leper colony. Alara felt the warmth of Julian's kiss vanish as the cold reality of the world outside the farmhouse flooded back in. "Stay here," Julian rasped, trying to stand. His legs were still weak, his recovery far from complete, but the steel was returning to his spine. "No," Alara whispered, steadying him. "We do this together." They met Silas in the kitchen. The room, which only moments ago had felt like a sanctuary of wood smoke and whispered confessions, now felt cramped and small. Silas didn't look at his nephew. His eyes were fixed on Alara with a venomous intensity. "The board has been patient, Julian," Silas began, his voice a smooth, corporate purr. "We allowed this rustic detour for the sake of your health, but the stockholders are getting restless. The Ice King, recovering in a dirt floor kitchen isn't a good look for the Thorne legacy." "My legacy is fine, Silas," Julian said, leaning heavily on the table. "I'll be back in the office when I'm ready." Silas chuckled, a dry, hollow sound. He turned his gaze to Alara. "And what about her? Is she the new chief of domestic affairs? Or just a clever girl who saw a billionaire in a weakened state and decided to secure her? Retirement? Quote, watch your tongue," Julian hissed. "Oh, let's be honest," Silas sneered, stepping toward Alara. "I know your type. You've played the long game, haven't you? 5 years of making yourself indispensable, waiting for the one moment he was broken enough to believe your love was real. How much do you want? 5 million? 10? Name the price for your silence and your departure. If you stay, I will leak the story that you manipulated a man with head trauma. I'll ensure your father's little farm is buried in legal fees for the next century." Alara felt the blood drain from her face. She looked at Julian, the man who had nearly died because of her, the man who was finally learning how to breathe. If she stayed, she would be the anchor that dragged his empire into the depths. If she stayed, Silas would destroy everything Julian had spent his life building. "I don't want your money," Alara said, her voice trembling. "Then prove it," Silas snapped. "Leave, now, before you ruin him." Julian tried to speak, but a coughing fit seized him, his lungs still recovering from the accident. In that moment of weakness, Alara made the hardest choice of her life. She looked at Silas, then back at the man she loved. "I can't be the reason he loses his throne," she thought. "He is a king. I won't let him be a martyr." She didn't say goodbye. She couldn't. She simply walked out of the kitchen, grabbed her coat, and disappeared into the night. The train station was a lonely, wind-swept platform. Alara sat on her suitcase, her heart feeling like a lead weight in her chest. She had left a note on the pillow. "I love you too much to let them destroy you. Go back to your empire, Julian. It's where you belong." She checked her watch. The train to the city that would swallow her whole, was due in 5 minutes. Suddenly, the roar of an engine drowned out the wind. A black car, not the SUV, but her grandfather's old, battered truck, skidded into the station parking lot. Julian tumbled out of the driver's side. He was pale, his shirt was unbuttoned, and he was limping badly. He shouldn't have been driving. He shouldn't have even been standing. "Alara," he roared, his voice cracking. She ran to the edge of the platform. "Julian, what are you doing? You're going to hurt yourself." Quote, he reached her, gasping for air, his hands clutching her shoulders as if he were afraid she would dissolve into smoke. You stupid, beautiful woman," he panted. "Did you really think I'd let you go for a set of keys to a building?" Quote, Silas said. "He said I'd ruin you," she sobbed. "The company, the stock, your name." Quote, "To hell with the name," Julian shouted, his eyes burning with a fire that eclipsed any office lights. "They can take the company. They can take the cars and the penthouse and every cent in the Thorne accounts. I've spent my life being a billionaire, Alara, and I was miserable. I was a statue. I was dead." He pulled her into his chest, his heart thundering against hers. "You brought me back to life. You are the only empire I care about. If being with you means I'm a commoner, then I'll be the happiest commoner in New York. He pulled a small, silver band from his finger. The ring his father had left behind. The only thing he'd ever kept from his past. He dropped to one knee right there on the platform. His face twisted in pain from his injuries, but his eyes never wavering. Alara Vance. I am a broken, difficult man who has forgotten how to be human. But I want to learn. I want to learn with you. Will you marry me? Quote. The commuters on the platform stopped. The wind seemed to die down. Alara looked at the man who had traded a crown for a heart. Yes, she whispered. Yes. Julian. Epilogue. 6 months later, Thorne Tower was still standing, but the Ice King was gone. Julian had successfully executed a silent coup, using Silas's own greed against him to secure a majority stake before stepping down as CEO to lead the Thorne Foundation, a multi-billion-dollar charity focused on rural healthcare. In the executive office on the 60th floor, the atmosphere was no longer thin or cold. There were plants in the corners and the smell of fresh coffee that wasn't burnt. Julian sat behind his desk, but he wasn't alone. Alara sat across from him, her hand resting on a stack of files. On her finger, the silver band caught the light of the Manhattan sun. The board meeting is in 10 minutes. Mr. Thorne, she teased, a playful glint in her eye. Julian stood up, walked around the desk, and pulled her into his arms. He didn't care about the schedule. He didn't care about the stockholders. He leaned down and kissed her, a deep, slow burn kiss that tasted of forever. Cancel it, he whispered against her lips. I'm distracted. By what? She breathed. By my wife, he smiled. And for the first time in my life, I don't mind the distraction at all.